Um, there's been a heaviness. I don't know if this is true for you guys, but with myself, with my team, um, just generally, there has been a heaviness and a weight about this week, and we're only in Tuesday. And I kind of felt it last week, but it's also not uncommon for this time of year, although it is spring and everything's growing. Everything's also changing, and it's also considered a time of rebirth. So typically, where there is death, there is rebirth. And what we know about that process or that symbolism is it doesn't have to be literal. It can be, there's a part of me that no longer serves me that I release or let go. That could be considered a death. Or it could also be a role or a title that I carried that I no longer carry. So, where there is death, there is rebirth. And about both of those processes, yes, there is something beautiful that eventually happens, but both of those stages are considered change. And whether it's change for the good or change for the bad, the body recognizes change as stress. And there's some type of grief process that happens. So, in hearing from my team today, they were really excited about this topic because it's been showing up for them in their sessions too. So I asked Celena if she would join me because Celena has a lot of non-traditional wisdom that we love to use when it comes to body stuff and grief. But I'll introduce a little bit around just the concept of grief. Um, for me, can be so literal with loss of a person, which absolutely is grief. Um, and when I apply that to my role as mom, I'm able to notice a lot more. Now I have a sound. I'm able to notice a lot more types of grief in my life. So, as a mom, my grief shows up because my boys, both of them, are considered atypical. And sometimes things happen so fast that there wasn't always a cognitive awareness of what that was going to mean for the future. And now that they're in school, there's like accommodations and 504s and IEPs. And although I did that many, many years ago when I worked with children, it's not something I've done in a long time. And it's not really something I thought I would be doing. I don't really know why. But it's definitely challenged my lens of codependency because I don't like it when people pity them. But what I notice about my grief is sometimes I want to deny it. Sometimes I want to deny what's right in front of me, or sometimes I want to deny that anything is needed or that I need anything. And what I talk about frequently in our other group is sometimes mommying is hard, and sometimes I do work because it's easier. I avoid. Work is easy for me. It's fun for me. It's enjoyable for me. I feel very lucky that I get to say that too. And sometimes being a mommy is really, really hard, and I don't always know what to do. My grief takes over and I want to avoid, so I numb with work. When we talk about grief, Celena's going to talk about where it shows up in the body, but there's different ways that grief shows up, but there's also grief that's happening in the current moment and complex grief, which is looking towards how it's going to affect our lives in the future. And grief can happen from change in jobs. Grief could happen from a medical condition diagnosis. Grief can happen from a change in our parents as they age or get older. My mom has lost quite a bit of her memory in her current state of dementia. And there's just lots of changes. There's lots of things that I just never considered or never thought of. And now that I'm in a more aware state, I'm kind of sitting in it more. And I think it's really interesting that the night we chose to talk about grief, it's also rainy and storming outside. Like the season is even letting us know that it's okay to release, it's okay to let go. But that's easier said than done. So I wanted to see, Celena, if you'd be willing to tell us a little bit more from the body perspective, um, how grief shows up in our body and what that means for us, especially if we carry it.
Yeah. And thank you for letting me co-lead today. I usually come just as a mom myself. So you may hear my son in the background a little bit too. But yeah, I have really gotten interested in traditional Chinese medicine. And from that viewpoint, we have an organ associated with each emotion, and they have a partner organ. So the main organ is the lungs, and then its partner organ is the large intestine. So with that, it's kind of like what Amber was saying, where there's the kind of in the moment grief and complex grief. And so if grief is there more so in the moment, it can show up a lot like shallow breathing, not being able to get a deep breath, congestion, even like runny nose, sneezing, and then also on an emotional side, feeling melancholic, depression. And with the large intestines, that looks more like constipation, abdominal pain. It can even affect tension in the neck, shoulders, and jaw. Those are all associated with the large intestines too. And so there can be a lot of tension held in those particular areas. And then kind of when it's complex or it's chronic for a long time, just thinking about like on a physiological sense, if we're not getting a lot of deep breaths and it's a lot of shallow breaths for a long period of time, the body's not getting a lot of oxygen. And when that happens, a lot of things can really thrive that aren't great for us, like toxins, tumors, really all of these negative things. And that can create a lot of chronic issues, which look more like diseases, maybe of different parts of the body. More things like all the itises, so like long-term inflammation of the lungs, like bronchiolitis, bronchitis, but even more so than that. And so really it affects a lot of different parts of the body. And a way I like to think of it too is grief. And this is even with like traditional Chinese medicine. Grief kind of is hanging around like a mist all around us until it's broken up somehow, like through tears or something. And so grief feels very heavy. And I think that's why a lot of times it can be felt in like the shoulders and the jaw. It's just this very, heavy feeling. And also with like the breathlessness and not being able to get a really deep breath. So that's kind of how it can show up somatically, at least from that perspective, a traditional Chinese medicine perspective. And just personally, I feel like that speaks to me. I was actually just reading up on this before coming on here and just thinking about how it showed up in my own life. And I think about when I thought I was on my recovery journey, but I wasn't quite yet, not really. And I had a lot of grief, experienced a lot of grief of different kinds, just like chronic pain, loss of mobility, and all these different symptoms kept coming up. And one of them was like a chest pain and like that feeling of not being able to catch a deep breath for a long time. And so it makes a lot of sense that it kind of just sits there to me, just on a personal level as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Celena. It's always fascinating to me how the older forms of healing um, say a lot of the same things. Because in shamanism, it's very similar. It's grief is stored or held in the lungs. And the way that that is released is through expressing it, right? Emotions are just energy in motion. And so the way that we release it is any way that our body can release it, through tears, through snot, through whatever. And I know in a lot of my processes, I still do this. There's something about crying. It has to be the right moment and the right time. And what I'm doing is I'm holding it. And then it makes a lot of sense why it gets harder and harder to let it go. Um, Thank you for sharing all that. It's fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even on that note, that's why lung and large intestine seems like a weird pairing. But the reason they both are associated with grief is because they're both, as organs, associated with letting go.
Yeah.
The lungs are like our first defense for pathogens and things like that. And our large intestines, pushes out toxins. So they're both kind of letting go in a physiological sense of things, but also emotionally speaking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, I was going to do a little bit of somatic work tied in with some kind of meditative type stuff, I guess I'd call it, through acupressure. And so I personally love acupressure. It's similar to acupuncture, but we can do it on ourselves. And I'm sure you'll hear my son babbling in the background. But from the standpoint, it helps kind of make those blocked portions in our body become more free flowing again. And so that's sort of the purpose behind this. And so I was going to give a few points. I'll do 2 or 3, just depending on how it goes, with just around grief in general. And so I was going to start with the lung spot, because we can all do this one, even if anyone is pregnant. So I'll demonstrate. So the way to get to this one is, if we go to our armpit, it's about 4 fingertip lengths up and then 1 fingertip length in. So it's like kind of right here. There's this muscle that goes across here. It's usually very tender. It is for me, especially on the right side here. I also just had a cold a few weeks ago. But this spot helps with a lot more, rather than just the emotion of grief. Although this spot is really used for letting go. So we just move it around in circles, little circles. And this is, I think it's long 4, if I remember correctly. I'm not 100%, but it can also help with opening the chest, getting a deep breath, which I usually feel when I do it. It can help with congestion. And that's all I can think of right now. But it helps with lots of different things. And so what I like to do when I'm massaging this point, just kind of reflect on what are things that maybe haven't been let go or are still being held on to. Or maybe things that I just kind of want more awareness around that. Like maybe what is in that step point for me, because it's tender. So there must be something there for me right now. So I'll just give a little bit of time for some reflection on this spot. Okay. And if you like these, you can practice these as much as you want, usually for like a minute to 3 minute, as many times throughout the day. But I don't know, that one even felt my jaw loosen up some.
Mhm.
So we're going to move to the second one, but if anyone's pregnant, you can just continue with this spot. This spot is not for women that are pregnant. So this is a large intestine spot, and it's kind of like right here, that triangle between the thumb and the pointer finger. It doesn't matter which hand you use, either one. You can even switch back and forth. And it's usually very tender. So this spot is called Union Valley, and it's used for lots of things, from headaches, migraines, to loosening the jaw, neck, and shoulders. And actually, this spot is known to kind of release any pain within the body. So it's also used for menstrual cramps. And it also can help relieve constipation or diarrhea. I actually use this whenever I went on a bachelorette weekend a couple of weekends ago. So if I've had more than normal to drink, I'll put it on this spot before I fall asleep. It helps kind of get anything out that's not needed. It's a detoxifying spot. It helps get toxins out as well. And so while we're massaging the spot, again, we can just kind of reflect on a similar thing of maybe anything that is stuck and maybe not serving us, or something that we want to have more insight around that is keeping us stuck here. I'll just give a little bit of time for this. I usually like to take a deep breath afterwards too. Let's see, which other one do I want to do? Anyone have anything that they feel, or I guess we're recording, so if you want to, I'll just go based off what I feel. We'll do the spot on our chest, which will be a little hard to show. So underneath our collarbone, there's a space, and then we're going to move down 4 spaces in between our ribs. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then right like in the center of the chest.
Mhm.
Also usually a very tender spot. It's about like right here. And this one's usually the most tender. So if it's too sensitive, it's okay to not push too hard. Again, little circles are really helpful for this. This is actually not on any meridian. It's on a conception vessel. So it helps with multiple places. But this spot is very centering. It's known as a chest center. And it helps with panic attacks, anxiety. Also helps with nausea. Helps with acid reflux, heart palpitations, that feeling of not being able to catch a deep breath. I usually have to take a few deep breaths while I'm pressing this spot. It really opens up the lungs. It's kind of a multi-purpose spot. And so here, when massaging this one, I like to reflect on my breath. I like to imagine my lungs filling up with air, and then emptying out with air as I'm pressing this point. So I'll give some time to focus on that for a little bit. Again, I always like to take a deep breath at the end. Yeah, that was my tool for today. Kind of a connection to some of those points that can help with the grief or some other things as well. So thank you for sharing, or allowing me to share.